In Afghanistan, Tony Stark, the billionaire weapons developer, would show the capabilities of his latest creation, the Jericho missile, to the US Army. With the generals and colonels impressed with the weapon's firepower, Stark would begin his jovial trip back to the United States amidst a military convoy. However, this fleet would come under attack, leaving Stark with numerous pieces of shrapnel from his own missile nearing his heart. As he awakens, he discovers that he has been taken captive by the terrorist organization known as the Ten Rings, who would attempt to force Stark alongside the Afghani developer Ho Yinsen to build for them a Jericho missile. Stark would instead, in combination with various scraps and his newly created miniature arc reactor, create a suit of metal to ensure the duo's survival. As this man of iron makes his great escape, Yinsen would become fatally wounded, asking Stark to make the most out of the rest of his life. Tony would use his armor to combat the Ten Rings, destroying his own stolen weapons in the process, all before launching himself from the battlefield, with his subsequent landing shattering his suit of armor, leaving fragments across the desert sands. After the word arrived that Tony Stark had gone missing, Batman and Robin, Bruce's new ward Jason Todd, would track his whereabouts, with Bruce Wayne hoping to ensure the safety of his once childhood friend. The dynamic duo would locate the cave in which Iron Man was born, analyzing the environment, deducing the nature of Tony's escape. Batman would anonymously inform the army as to Stark's most likely whereabouts, where Colonel James Rhodes, a longtime ally of Tony, would rescue Stark. Tony would then announce to the press, as well as his contemporary Obadiah Stane, that Stark Industries would cease any weapons development, leading to an uproar. In the following days, Stark would develop an improved miniature arc reactor to power the magnet near his heart, before being paid a visit by a familiar face, Bruce Wayne. Tony would be at first apprehensive of this apparent intervention, wondering if, like the voices on TV, Wayne was simply here to call him crazy. Bruce would joke that he's been called crazy himself, being known to buy out hotels or restaurants if dissatisfied with the service. No, Bruce was here to let Tony know how proud he was of his old friend, to remind Tony of the uneasy relationship their fathers had after Howard decided to build his wealth on weapons of war. Tony would lament that, like his father, he felt that he was doing the right thing in continuing his father's legacy. Bruce would tell Tony, "I miss him too. That won't ever go away." Stark would state that he would no longer let the expectations of his father drive him any further down his path. Tony's eyes would then catch the television with news coverage of the Ten Rings forces causing terror in the Middle Eastern town of Galmera. Bruce would, at this time, be made aware of a recent sighting of the Joker via Jason Todd in Wayne's hidden earpiece. Tony would thank Bruce for stopping by before telling his old friend that he had some much-needed business to be dealt with Bruce remarking that he was needed back in Gotham. The heirs would part. Tony would then confront Stane about the matter of his weapons being used by the Ten Rings forces, only to hear that Obadiah sought to usurp Stark's place as CEO of Stark Industries. This would embolden Tony to develop a new version of the Iron Man armor, taking his suit to Galmera to dispatch the terrorist organization. Meanwhile, Stane has been in contact with the Ten Rings cell leader, Raza, who has reassembled Stark's first suit of armor. Stane would then dispose of Raza and his Ten Ring squad, stealing the armor for himself, taking the suit back to Stark Industry engineers. They, however, admit that they simply can't recreate the arc reactor technology necessary to power a suit such as this. With this knowledge, Stane would forcibly remove the reactor within Tony's chest, leaving him for dead. Thankfully, Pepper Potts, Tony Stark's personal assistant, as well as the anchor to his ego, had previously gifted Tony with the prior model of Tony's arc reactor. With everything in place, Stane would encase himself in his newly constructed Ironmonger armor, before being assaulted by a team of S.H.I.E.L.D. agents who were prior made informed of Stane's nefarious activity through Pepper Potts. This covert squad would be quickly dispatched by the Ironmonger's might, before Iron Man, armed with a less than half full power arc reactor, begins his assault on Obadiah Stane. This battle would very nearly end in the death of Tony, if not for Pepper's intervention. firing the reserve of the massive arc reactor stationed in Stark Industries into Ironmonger, killing him. The next morning, Tony, under the guidance of S.H.I.E.L.D. agent Phil Coulson, would be instructed to spout a fabricated cover story as to the nature of Stane's death, as well as the identity of Iron Man. Tony would, instead, change history by defiantly and triumphantly uttering these words to the news agencies of the world.
I am Iron Man.
On that very night, Tony would come face to face with Nick Fury, with the director of S.H.I.E.L.D. announcing,
"You think you're the only superhero in the world? Mr. Stark, you've become part of a bigger universe. You just don't know it yet."
Who the hell are you?
Nick Fury, director of S.H.I.E.L.D.
Oh.
I'm here to talk to you about the Avenger Initiative.
One year after these events, we find Dr. Banner, who, after extensive globetrotting, has made his stay in Brazil, where he earns his humble keep through employment at a soda factory. He also practices techniques to temper and control his latent fury. However, all these pastimes are mere distractions, for Banner's true goal is to find a cure for his gamma radiation-induced ailment, a cure for the Incredible Hulk. His search has led him into online contact with one Mr. Blue, a fellow doctor stationed in the United States. In a twist of fate, Banner incidentally contaminates a bottle within his place of employment with his toxic radioactive blood. This would in turn lead to the unfortunate death of one consumer in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, which would catch the attention of General Thaddeus Thunderbolt Ross, who had been hunting Bruce Banner ruthlessly ever since his initial transformation. Amidst a landing strip along U.S. Army Base Fort Johnson, General Ross would meet with two individuals. One, Emil Blonsky, a Russian-born, British-raised elite operative, as well as, to Ross's befuddlement, a Colonel Rick Flag. Ross had gone out of his way to enlist Blonsky, hoping to take advantage of his high-level tracking and detainment skills. But Flag, well, he was every bit a war hero as Emil, but Ross had made no attempt to get him on board. Something was off. In a military aircraft en route to Brazil, Ross would begin his briefing, informing Blonsky and his strike team of the latent threat that Banner presents, all but the knowledge pertaining to his terrifying transformation. As night falls in Brazil, Ross's strike force would move in on Banner's location. However, before Blonsky and his men can obtain their target, Banner has fled. A grand chase would ensue, leading to the nearby soda factory, where Banner, under intense stress, would unwillingly let loose a force of titanic proportions. While the strike squad would do combat with this green behemoth, Flag would maintain his distance, intently observing the conflict. With Blonsky and Flag being the last surviving members of this unit, they would reconverge with General Ross, who would puzzlingly state that the creature they had just encountered was, in fact, Dr. Banner. As Ross and his cohorts return to the US, so does Banner, as he starts his trek to meet this Mr. Blue in person, hoping that, with their two minds in the same room, he could finally free himself from his curse. Back at the Pentagon, Ross would personally brief Blonsky as to the nature of Banner's research, as well as his accident. Blonsky would note that if only he possessed the skills he had thus far accumulated, combined with the strength of his youth, he may very well pose a threat to the Hulk. With this, Ross would secretly introduce Blonsky to the latest variant of the super soldier serum developed by the Army, all while unaware of Rick Flag's eavesdropping into this conversation. Bruce would finally make his way to Culver University, not returning since his initial transformation years ago. He would reunite with Betty Ross, the love of his life, where she would give Bruce a thumb drive containing their research data on gamma radiation. As this is happening, Blonsky would be injected with a low dose of the Army's variant of the super soldier serum. As Betty and Bruce converge on Culver University to the ends of taking advantage of its research hardware, the Army task force led by a now enhanced Blonsky once again brings forth the Jade Giant. For all that Blonsky's amplified speed, strength, and agility are worth, he is still nothing compared to the overwhelming power of the Hulk, and only acts as a means of distraction. While this chaos ensues, Flag would, with the use of specialized equipment, analyze the biological data from both the Hulk as well as Blonsky, all before Emil is easily dispatched by the Hulk, with the Titan taking Betty Ross away from the battlefield. In the following days, Bruce would make contact with Mr. Blue, heading towards his location in New York City, while Blonsky miraculously heals from his wounds thanks to the serum coursing through his veins. The Army would, while aided by S.H.I.E.L.D., discover Banner's goal through tracing his emails. This would lead Blonsky and his team to hone in on the research lab of Samuel Stern, aka Mr. Blue, where himself, Bruce, and Betty would successfully suppress Banner's transformation, leaving him vulnerable for his latest attempt at capture. While Bruce is stowed away on a transport, Stern is being interrogated in his lab as to the nature of his research. However, Blonsky, feeling drunk with power after his second dose of the super soldier serum, forces Stern at gunpoint to induce a Hulk-like transformation in himself, creating something one could only call an abomination. As this abomination tears through the streets of Harlem, Rick Flag investigates the wreckage of Stern's laboratory, finding the irradiated doctor cackling amongst a collection of Banner's gamma-infused blood. Flag would detain Stern, as well as destroy all traces of Bruce's DNA, before calling in for an extraction from a certain Miss Waller. As the might of the military falls short compared to Blonsky's madness, Banner asserts overhead that he is the only one capable of defeating this monster. With Banner falling into the New York City pavement, a different being would rise. Thus would begin the battle for Harlem. Thus begins Abomination versus the Hulk. As their fight rages on, Hulk would gain the upper hand as Blonsky would begin to threaten Betty's immediate safety, with the Hulk then all but killing his gamma-infused foe. With Hulk still seeing his presence as separate from contemporary society, he once again flees, seeking seclusion. Yes, ma'am, everything went according to plan. Serum's en route to base alongside Blonsky. That's right, Ross didn't suspect a thing. Feels wrong undercutting a fellow countryman, but yeah, don't have to tell me twice. We'll have to put him in cryosleep until the team's been finalized, I guess. The council's gonna give us some of Fury's agents? Well, I'll be damned. Guess Task Force X might become a reality after all.